In 2005, there was a young man named Matt who attended a college in Texas. He was a senior, deeply committed to his studies, and had his eyes on a girl named Emily, also a senior in his class. Matt was captivated by Emily, and after several attempts, she finally agreed to go out with him. Their connection was immediate and profound. Upon graduation in 2007, Matt and Emily got married. They bought a charming home with a white picket fence in a serene neighborhood in Austin, Texas. Life seemed idyllic. Both had flourishing careers, dedicated time to each other, and soon they welcomed their first child, a daughter, in 2009. 2 years later, their son was born, and another daughter followed in 2012, completing their picture-perfect family. Every morning, Matt had a ritual of making breakfast for the kids, and they cherished their family game nights on weekends. Matt and Emily always found ways to keep the romance alive with regular date nights. Life was the epitome of the American dream. In 2013, while working from home one Saturday afternoon, Matt noticed something unusual. In the corner of their living room, a door that led to a small storage room seemed slightly ajar. It was odd because Matt was certain they always kept it closed. He dismissed it, thinking one of the kids must have opened it and forgotten to close it. Curiosity got the better of him, and he walked over to the door. As he pushed it open, he felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. The small room, which usually stored old toys and holiday decorations, seemed different. The air felt denser, and there was a faint, musty smell that hadn't been there before. He could hear a distant, rhythmic thumping sound that he couldn't identify. Trying to shake off his discomfort, he stepped inside to investigate. The thumping grew louder, resonating with an almost hypnotic rhythm. It felt as if the walls were pulsing in sync with the sound. Matt felt a sudden wave of dizziness but brushed it off, attributing it to stress and lack of sleep. He quickly left the room and shut the door firmly behind him. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about the strange occurrence. He tried to talk to Emily about it, but the words wouldn't come out. He decided to ignore it, convincing himself it was nothing serious. The following day, Matt found himself drawn back to the storage room. The door was ajar again. This time, the pulsing was more pronounced, almost as if the room itself was alive. As he entered, the dizziness hit him harder, and the rhythmic thumping seemed to reverberate through his entire body. He stood there, mesmerized by the pulsating walls, until he felt an overwhelming need to leave. Emily and the kids noticed Matt's odd behavior. He became distant, spending hours staring at the storage room door. One evening, Emily confronted him, but Matt couldn't explain what was happening. He felt an inexplicable compulsion to return to that room, a compulsion he couldn't resist. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Matt found himself standing in front of the door again. He opened it, and the rhythmic thumping enveloped him. The walls seemed to close in, and the room's pulsing rhythm synchronized with his heartbeat. He felt an intense pain in his head, followed by a deafening silence. When he opened his eyes, Matt found himself lying on the ground, surrounded by a crowd of people. Disoriented, he realized he was in the aftermath of a car accident, surrounded by concerned bystanders. A police officer rushed through the crowd, helped him to his feet, and hurriedly escorted him to an ambulance. Matt, bewildered, asked about Emily and his children, but the officer remained silent, focusing on getting him to the hospital. At the hospital, doctors treated Matt for a severe concussion. He was informed that he had been in a car accident and had lost consciousness for only a few seconds. In those fleeting moments, his mind had constructed an entire life, a wife, children, and a home that never existed. As Matt processed this, he was devastated. The vivid memories of his family, the love, and the life they shared were nothing more than a figment of his imagination. The grief of losing a family that never existed weighed heavily on him, leaving him to cope with the haunting memories of a life he never truly lived. To this day, Matt dreams of his children, forever frozen in time, reminding him of the forgotten room that once felt so real. Lena had always loved her quiet neighborhood. It was a peaceful cul-de-sac where everyone knew each other. The neighbors would host barbecues in the summer, and there was a sense of community that made her feel safe. She lived alone after her husband passed away, but she never felt lonely with such friendly neighbors around. Her next-door neighbor, Mr. Harlow, was a reclusive man in his 50s. He rarely came out except to collect his mail or take out the trash, but he always gave Lena a polite nod when their paths crossed. One evening, Lena was reading a book in her living room when she heard a noise from outside. It was a soft scraping sound, followed by a faint tapping at her window. She peered through the curtains but saw nothing unusual. Dismissing it as a stray branch or an animal, she returned to her book. However, the noises continued over the next few days, each time a little louder and closer to her house. Feeling unnerved, Lena mentioned it to her neighbor, Mrs. Keating, during their weekly coffee chat. Mrs. Keating frowned and glanced over at Mr. Harlow's house. "I've heard strange noises too, mostly at night. I thought it was just my imagination," she said. They decided to keep an eye out for anything unusual and report back to each other. That night, Lena was awoken by a loud crash. Her heart raced as she got out of bed and crept towards the source of the noise. She saw a figure dart past her window and disappear into the shadows. She called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no sign of anyone. The next day, Lena found muddy footprints near her back door and what looked like scratch marks on the frame. She decided to install security cameras around her property, hoping to catch the intruder if they returned. She shared her concerns with Mr. Harlow when she saw him outside, but he just gave a non-committal grunt and went back inside. A week later, Lena's cameras captured something disturbing. In the footage, a shadowy figure could be seen lurking near her house, staring intently at her windows. The figure would move around the property, occasionally pressing its face against the glass as if trying to peer inside. She handed the footage to the police, who promised to increase patrols in the area. Despite the police presence, the strange occurrences continued. Lena felt a growing sense of dread, always looking over her shoulder, jumping at every noise. One night, she woke up to the sound of someone trying to open her front door. She rushed to the door and looked through the peephole, but saw no one. The next morning, she found scratches on the lock as if someone had tried to pick it. Determined to confront her fears, Lena decided to stay up and catch the intruder herself. She set up in her living room with a clear view of the front yard, her phone ready to call the police. Around midnight, she saw movement in the shadows. Her heart pounded as she watched a figure emerge from Mr. Harlow's yard. The figure moved stealthily towards her house, and Lena finally saw his face. It was Mr. Harlow. Lena's hands trembled as she called the police, whispering the situation to the dispatcher. The figure was trying to pry open her window when the police arrived, their lights illuminating the scene. Mr. Harlow froze, then bolted back towards his house, but the officers caught him before he could escape. As the police questioned him, Lena learned the unsettling truth. Mr. Harlow had been watching her for months, obsessed with the idea that she was hiding something valuable in her home. He had been trying to find a way to break in and search for whatever it was he believed she had. The noises, the scratches, the shadowy figure. It had all been him. With Mr. Harlow arrested and the immediate danger gone, Lena tried to return to normal life. However, the sense of safety and peace she once felt in her neighborhood was shattered. The realization that someone she thought she knew could harbor such dark intentions left her constantly wary. She continued her weekly coffee chats with Mrs. Keating and made an effort to be more vigilant. The neighborhood pulled together, installing more security measures and forming a watch group to ensure everyone's safety. Lena knew she would never fully regain the sense of security she once had, but she found solace in the community's support and their shared commitment to keeping each other safe. In the end, Lena's story became a cautionary tale for her neighbors, a reminder that sometimes the real horrors lie just next door, hidden in the shadows of familiarity. Maggie had always loved her job as a park ranger in the remote wilderness of Montana. The vast, untouched landscapes, the tranquility, and the sense of purpose it gave her were unmatched. The nearest town was miles away, and the isolation was a welcome escape from her previous life in the bustling city. She enjoyed the solitude, but there were times when the isolation felt a bit eerie. One crisp autumn evening, Maggie received a call on her radio about a missing hiker. It wasn't unusual for hikers to get lost, especially as the days grew shorter and the weather turned colder. The missing person was a young man named Tom, who had come to the park for a solo camping trip. His friends had reported him missing after he failed to return home. Maggie set out immediately, following the trail Tom had registered before his hike. The forest was dense, and the fading light made it difficult to see. She walked for hours, calling out Tom's name, but there was no response. As night fell, she decided to set up camp and continue the search at first light. In the middle of the night, Maggie was awakened by a rustling sound outside her tent. She listened intently, her heart pounding. It could be an animal, she told herself, but something felt off. Grabbing her flashlight, she unzipped the tent and shone the light into the darkness. The beam of light caught a fleeting glimpse of someone, darting between the trees. "Tom?" she called out, but there was no answer. She decided to investigate, keeping her flashlight steady and her radio close. As she walked deeper into the forest, the sense of being watched grew stronger. Suddenly, she stumbled upon a small clearing and saw an old, decrepit cabin that wasn't marked on any of the park maps. The cabin's door was ajar, and an unsettling silence hung in the air. Maggie felt a chill run down her spine as she approached. Pushing the door open, she was met with the sight of a room cluttered with old, decaying furniture and strange symbols carved into the walls. In the center of the room was a trapdoor, slightly open, with a faint light flickering below. Her instincts told her to leave, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that Tom might be inside. Taking a deep breath, she descended the creaky wooden steps. The air grew colder and more oppressive with each step. At the bottom, she found a dimly lit basement filled with more carvings and ritualistic objects. In the corner, she saw Tom. He was tied to a chair, unconscious but alive. As she rushed to free him, she heard a door slam upstairs. Someone was in the cabin with them. Panic surged through her, but she focused on untying Tom, whispering reassurances. Just as she got Tom free, heavy footsteps echoed down the stairs. Maggie grabbed a nearby piece of wood, ready to defend them. A tall, shadowy figure emerged, its face obscured by a hood. The figure moved towards them with deliberate, menacing steps. Maggie swung the piece of wood, hitting the figure's arm. The figure stumbled but quickly regained its balance, advancing again. In the struggle, Maggie managed to knock the hood back, revealing a gaunt, hollow-eyed man who looked more like a corpse than a living person. His eyes were filled with a cold, malevolent rage. Tom regained consciousness, and together they fought off the attacker, managing to push him back into the trapdoor and lock it. They didn't wait to see if he would break free. Grabbing Tom's arm, Maggie led him out of the cabin and into the forest. They ran for what felt like hours until they finally reached her campsite. Maggie radioed for help, and a rescue team arrived soon after. They secured the area and searched the cabin, but found no trace of the man. The symbols and ritualistic items were later identified as part of an occult practice dating back centuries, rumored to involve human sacrifices. Tom was taken to the hospital and made a full recovery, but the experience left him deeply traumatized. Maggie, too, was haunted by the events of that night. She continued her job as a park ranger, but always felt a lingering sense of unease. The cabin was destroyed and the area was closed off to the public. Yet rumors persisted of strange sightings and eerie noises in that part of the forest. Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that the horror she encountered was far from over, and that the forest held secrets far darker than anyone could imagine. Remember, while we cherish the beauty and tranquility of nature, there are often hidden dangers lurking just beyond the trees. Sometimes the real horrors are not the ones we can see, but the ones that remain hidden in the shadows, waiting for their next victim. Like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more horror stories.